must be aware that we have people in our world that lie to each other and those who choose to deliberately deceive others. How do you look at this?
Sure, we are aware that you have the option to play out such roles amongst each other. One person pretending to quote-unquote hide certain information by either presenting a distorted version of reality or covering something up, and the other person quote-unquote buying into it, as you say. We see that that is a game that you can choose to play.
How do you mean? You mean they are not actually lying?
Well, they are on the surface level of your reality, but if you would tune in with them telepathically, you would find that you can't actually lie about anything when it comes down to it. Your energy field, so to speak, always contains the vibration of your actual intent. Lying, seen from that point of view, is by definition an upstream endeavor. In doing so, you are going against your own natural state of being. You are pushing against a vibration that makes a part up of your own energy field. The vibration that represents what you know in your heart is your true intent.
Is this the case even when we lie out of politeness, a little white lie as we call it, like telling someone they look great when in fact I think they could look better? Is even that upstream?
In a sense, yes. You see, you can choose to paint the original idea over with a little layer of distortion all you like, but the reason you do so is what reveals what wants your actual attention in that moment. A lie has as its primary function to distract the other person from what you actually believe or know to be true for you. So the question is, why do you need the other person to be distracted from that? What do you fear will happen if they knew? These are interesting questions to ask yourself in such moments. Sure, we understand that the little white lie, in your culture at least, can be considered as a way of showing your respect or affection for another person. Yet simultaneously, you choose to be in hiding from that same exact person because you do not trust what may happen if you would tell them your truth. How then is that an expression of your respect and affection? We find this intriguing, as we can see how close you have evolved, at least a segment of your population, to actually being able to consciously see right through all of such smoke and mirrors. You see, if the other person is in tune with their own inner knowing, they would most likely pick up on the fact that they're being lied to, as no deliberately fabricated lie can have a harmonious vibration. And disharmony is what stands out. Nature is a rich and multi-layered orchestra in balance. It is the music flowing harmoniously. A lie is like the sour note. It is what yells, "Look at me." It is what makes you wave your own inner red flags, so to speak, because you subconsciously wish this aspect to align with the rest of the orchestra. You have a desire to look at this, to acknowledge and transform it, so it can go with the flow and fit in, and you would be able to enjoy the deepened abundance of this music. It just depends on how ready a person is to allow themselves to listen to such intuitive nudges. But you all naturally crave balance, harmony, flow.
So, if someone feels forced to lie to another person, or to themselves for that matter, by ignoring their own real preferences, for instance, if they feel forced to do this in order to, say, keep their job, then this is not a way of going with the flow.
When a person feels forced to do anything, then for them, clearly, they are not in a flow state. Yet the intensity levels of inwardly felt friction may differ per person and obviously per situation. In cases such as these, when you feel forced, as you say, to do something, you will usually pick what you choose to believe in that moment is the quote-unquote lesser of two evils, even though neither options are in alignment with what you actually desire. Going by this type of decision-making, you could say that choosing the path of least resistance may appear to contain a somewhat higher level of flow for that person, and on the short term, and from the perspective of the ratio, this can certainly be experienced as true. But if they're willing to dig for the gold, so to say, it might assist them to understand that the fact that they manifested for themselves a situation wherein they feel confronted with such an obvious limitation onto itself reveals that there must be room for much greater relief and expansion in some other direction, other than the one they've been telling themselves to focus upon up until then.
Could you please expand on that?
Yes. In case of your example, for instance, simply quitting the job that is forcing them, as you say, to lie to others or to themselves may seem to be the harder decision to make on a short-term basis, but may in fact bring the greater relief and open up much more fruitful possibilities for them in the long run. Who knows, after some rest and some inner realignment, they may allow themselves to then find another job that actually suits them much better, of which the manager, or what have you, wishes to hire them exactly because they were not afraid to stand up for their own principles at the previous job. You may see more and more of this in your reality as your collective evolution unfolds.
As in personal values becoming more important and more rewarded?
In which case, the quote-unquote reward, as you call it, would simply be the reflection of your level of self-acceptance, as you choose to honor yourself to such a degree that you feel you are worthy of living in alignment with your own sense of integrity. Then circumstances will eventually begin to reflect this back to you in one way or another.
Even if that following of your own integrity involves some level of risk?
There are many ways to look at the idea of risk-taking. From a fear-based perspective, almost everything can be seen as a risk. On the other hand, it could be said that none of your well-known inventors, nor any person who ever introduced new, expensive ideas to your society, decided to hold back on this as a result of the consideration that perhaps they might run some risk in doing so. Even if they did.
Clearly.
On the other hand, sometimes you may invite what you call the idea of risk into your life as a type of natural course corrector. It may just be one way for you to remind yourself of what is and what is not truly in alignment with your higher self. And this will become obvious to you then quite naturally, as you will perhaps surprisingly find yourself realizing that what previously seemed like a risk to the rational mind now all of a sudden doesn't seem to be that much of a risk anymore, for instance. And then you may have outgrown certain fears and ideas that no longer actually serve you anyway.
I see. And what about integrity? Could you dive a little deeper into that?
Of course. When it comes to integrity, the way you choose to express this may look different from person to person. Overall, you will want to act in a way that you believe is in the highest good for yourself and all others involved. Being transparent about these ideas towards others and consistent in the way you act on these ideas are what generally determine the idea of what you, in your language, call integrity. This quote-unquote highest good will, however, mostly remain a mental concept until you become more consciously aware of your innate telepathic connection, which would then be the automatic reflection of your shared heart energy and conscious communication to the individual and collective higher self. The rational mind, on its own, simply hasn't been designed to calculate, so to speak, in every single instance what actually is in another person's quote-unquote highest good, or even for your own for that matter. You may have heard us say this before. You cannot be ultimately responsible for another. You can, however, act responsible towards them to the best of your ability, and as seen from the framework of your individual beliefs in that here and now moment. Integrity fits that same idea. And so, what to one person is considered a politeness, for example, may be interpreted by another as denigrating or even offensive. Subcultural differences, your personal character and spiritual evolution, ongoing changing circumstances, all of this will continuously invite you to review what you believe to be true about one thing or the other. This makes your system of beliefs, and therefore your sense of what it means to act from integrity, a constantly evolving idea. And so how you choose to express it eventually comes down to perspective mostly, like the consideration to use a little white lie as discussed earlier.
I can see that. So, to what degree then would you say does the expression of one's integrity have anything to do with, say, a willingness to follow, for instance, local guidelines or restrictions?
Alright, this too will depend per person. For one individual, it may have everything to do with this idea, yet for another, perhaps nothing, and anything in between. Lots of people within their own lives are strict with some rules and loose regarding others. Like we already said, the translation of what integrity means does not translate or express the same way for everybody. Also, you may not have been given the same amount of information on a specific topic, for instance, or even if you have, you may have interpreted it in a very different way.
Some of the suggested guidelines connected to the pandemic, well, simply don't match my personal sense of integrity. This is, among others, the result of a wide range of medical information I got from collectives of independent doctors and virologists worldwide.
Alright.
Together, they represent thousands of professionals. To me, this information has been very self-empowering, and it has put a lot of things in perspective. But it has also pointed out, in my opinion, the pointlessness of some of the current restrictions still ongoing in the world.
Alright, from a higher perspective, all of this can be seen as a co-creation. You constantly create mirrors for one another within your physical dream reality. Whatever boundary you feel is being crossed for you is also an invitation for yourself to re-investigate your own values and beliefs, perhaps towards yourself, perhaps towards another. This may not have to do anything with the pandemic even. It might be related to your private life, your family, your self-esteem, or even to how you look at the world at large. It can be many things. What you are currently witnessing, though, is one of the many expression forms of the energetic, co-created acceleration for your entire species to walk through such things. If the way your governments and pharmaceutical industries are now addressing this virus is not in harmony with your inner knowing, then turn to your inner knowing to see how you can flow with it in a way that creates harmony within you. See if you can find a way that communicates with this inner knowing in a way that inspires you to become creative, loving, compassionate, understanding, and that allows you to remain in a general state of optimism, if at all possible. For all of this will eventually be the automatic side effect of truly tuning deeper into your inner knowing. One of the most valuable things to remind yourself of is that you, in your version of reality, are able to use any and all of the ingredients you now observe laying on the table in front of you in a way that serves you. This means you can use the sense of friction you feel gets triggered in you when you observe certain seemingly opposing perspectives. It means you can use the question marks you feel in the back of your head and all of the seeming limitations in front of you without exception. You can use all of this to, in fact, dive deeper within yourself and come out even more, quote-unquote, defined, more confident, loving, and inspired. When it comes to these challenges, remember, there are no one-ended sticks. If there is darkness on one end, there must be light on the other. And if you access the one, you carry within yourself the possibility to also access the other. Keep that in mind, and you will never find yourself trapped in the illusion of being stuck on just one end of the spectrum.
But I wouldn't mind being stuck on the light side, though.
We understand what you mean by that, and we appreciate your humor. Let us add, though, that the entire illusion of being quote-unquote stuck with anything is not actually available on the light side of the spectrum. You would have to move at least a tiny bit beyond neutrality and into the dark, metaphorically speaking, in order to fool yourself into that idea to begin with. So, no can do. Okay, let us say your individual and collective journey surrounding the idea of this pandemic is but one tiny aspect out of the many, many ways you can choose to reflect such inner processes to yourselves by. Your economy, your governments, the way you look at the value of products and services, even the question whether or not you are alone in the universe. How to value yourself or each other? It is all currently up for a review. Your collective desire to move to a higher frequency is felt so deeply. It has so much momentum that you have decided to pull everything out of the closet, so to speak. Remember that, no matter what reflections of darkness you may allow into your version of reality, you carry within you the powers needed to lift them into the light. Though the contrast may, for another while, perhaps seem to increase, the shifting and sorting process as a result of this shall paradoxically get easier and easier for many of you. As this storyline, with all its seeming contradictions, unfolds, so will your desire for clarity. The desire for clarity is the way of the rational mind to get its own attention to turn inward, as it intuits on a deeper level, or on the level of what you call the subconscious, that there is such a thing as your inner knowing. It is the subconscious and the rational mind beginning to become aware of their innate oneness. Your inner being already knows. It constantly invites the rational mind to remember. And as it does, for most of you, this journey begins with a desire to express yourself as you truly know yourselves to be. This includes allowing yourself to ask questions where you feel a need to, and to feel free and at ease in the exploring of even challenging subjects within yourself or with others, without fearing the outcome. That then will be the first step towards the grounding of your inner knowing, which is desired by so many of you at this point in your time. And with the increase of that grounding, all of the clarity you desire shall eventually become obvious to you in an infinite amount of ways. Most of all, you will at some point know with a capital K, without a shadow of a doubt, that the light of your inner knowing is and always has been like a guiding torch. A torch that shall only be experienced as quote-unquote burning you up when you allow the rational mind to buy into a need to quote-unquote take control over it, or when it begins to tell you that this light cannot be trusted and therefore should be dimmed. The individual and collective desire to shift to a higher vibrational version of your experienced reality stands or falls with your willingness to connect with your inner being, to connect with your higher self, and to, from that perspective, get to know yourself anew and anew and anew. To connect with yourself in that way is to connect with Source or with unconditional love. and there is no conscious connecting to the self, were you to discard right from the start your personal sense of inner knowing.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reflecting this to me. I cannot say how much this means to me right now.